Yes, people, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another live stream. And tomorrow afternoon, Graham Potter returns to the Amex Stadium as Chelsea take on Brighton in the Premier League. The Blues' unbeaten run still going. It's on the line. Brighton are looking for a first win under Roberto De Zerbi, so something's got to give here. You know, Brighton have got to win eventually. Chelsea, unfortunately, have got to lose at some point. And a good win against RB Salzburg in midweek, top Champions League Group E. That's done and dusted. So that's a real big plus going into Wednesday night, where we can just play a completely rotated side ahead of Arsenal next weekend. But we won't get too far ahead of ourselves. It's going to be a tricky game. Brighton are going to be well up for this one, still looking for their first win since the manager came in. And there'll be a little bit of extra spice. You know, the fans will be up for a bit more. The players will be up for it more. If they want to beat anyone, it'll be their former manager. So it's going to be a tough ask. And we're going to discuss all this and a lot more, and I'm delighted to be joined by Oli. Mate, great to have you as always. Looking forward to getting stuck into a few things. Very briefly, what did you make of Tuesday night's performance against Salzburg? A lot of people saying it was some of the best football we've played in a long time, certainly the best football under Graham Potter. Did you see it that way as well?
Yeah, Charlie, thanks again for having me on the show. Always like coming on here. Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. Some of the best football I've seen in years, for Chelsea. And I was going to say at the Bridge, but we were away. It was some of the greatest football I've seen at Chelsea in a long, long time, especially towards the end of that first half against Salzburg. I thought we played really, really well, really dynamic. But at the same time, very direct and, sort of quick one-touch, two-touch passing, really made it difficult for Salzburg. And I think if our shooting boots were on a little bit better, I think the game probably would have been out of sight in the first half. And, their goalkeeper had an absolute worldie as well. I think his name, Cone, Cone, something like that. He had a really, really good game as well. So it took some special strikes to beat him, and we did.
Yeah, no, we certainly did. And as I said, having got that done and dusted, that's a real big plus heading into next week. But Brighton, the task at hand is tricky. I mean, I've not watched an awful lot of Brighton since De Zerbi's come in. Obviously, I saw they got the 3-3 draw at Anfield. They probably should have won that game. I think they've been unlucky in certain games, but they're still looking for a win. Potter obviously knows the players very well. De Zerbi, I think, has kind of slightly tweaked the system a little bit. They seem to be playing a back four a little bit more. Obviously, I don't think Potter knowing the players is going to be a massive advantage to us because it's a completely different system. They'll be playing in a different way. Likewise, for Brighton, the players know what Potter does, but again, it's different players and it's implemented in a slightly different way. So, I mean, I don't think there's too much crossover there. I mean, do you think it's a advantage or disadvantage, the knowledge that Potter has on Brighton?
I think it's probably, if anything, it's probably going to lead to a more conservative game. Because the players of Brighton do know what Potter can do, and Potter knows certainly what the players of Brighton can do, and he'll know the strengths and weaknesses of individuals, and even within whatever lineup they field, he'll probably have an idea about which side to target, who to target, when to do it, what speed to play, things like that. So I think there will be a little bit of that. And I think it will lead to a slightly more conservative style of game rather than sort of the all-out attack that Brighton and now Chelsea are slowly becoming known for.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I would agree that probably they don't want to. Chelsea it could lead to a more conservative game. Kind of both teams might cancel each other out possibly. But again,
that's kind of my thought.
Yeah, that's always the slight worry when you've got such inside knowledge on a side from a previous manager. I mean, we are playing in 50 odd days after he left, so it's not. It really isn't that long ago.
A different side, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like it's kind of a year later where things might be a little bit different. It is going to be much of a likeness for Brighton, but still, they do possess a threat. Leandro Trossard, again, I mean, we'll be watching him for two reasons. One, not to cause any problems in the game, but also linked to a potential transfer to Chelsea. Again, Moise Caicedo as well, possibly linked in January. I mean, are you going to be paying particular attention to those two players to see how they do? Because I think particularly Caicedo, he's one that there's a real possibility that he could come in January.
I was actually going to say more Trossard than Caicedo, only because I think there are more midfield options that we are considering as well as Caicedo. So, I think if we did miss out on Caicedo, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But Trossard seems to be quite a special player for Brighton. And there aren't many sort of more attacking talented players like that, Premier League proven, that we're going for at the moment. So it will be interesting to see how he plays tomorrow.
Yeah, no, it certainly will. It's all, I mean, I don't want to call it an audition because it's not really, but it kind of, there's like the club are going to be watching him, and it's a chance to impress against potentially his next team. So he's obviously going to be right up for it. But in terms of the game itself, I mean, how do you see it going? I mean, we're on this unbeaten run. Played well on Tuesday night. I would expect, we'll get into it later, but I would expect a very strong side, given the fact we've already qualified with guaranteed top spot. We'll probably can play a completely different team against Zagreb, so we're fully rested for next weekend against Arsenal in a big game at the top end of the Premier League. But I mean, how do you kind of see it going? Do you think Brighton will pose us problems? Do you think we can continue the unbeaten run, make it 10 games unbeaten under Potter?
Well, I mean, on paper, you'd say no, wouldn't you? Because, we're the ones on the unbeaten run, and Brighton are yet to find a win under their new manager. And but it never quite works out that way. I wouldn't be surprised if, like we said, the previous knowledge sort of leads to a slight cancelling out of each other's tactics or whatever, especially the Brighton players to a certain degree who will, having played Potter's system, know in some way how to counter that system. So it will be interesting whether they decide to match us up man for man, whether they go at 3 at the back as well to try and match us at the back and in midfield as well. It's an interesting one. I think if we play as well as we did against Salzburg, I don't see why we wouldn't beat them. But then again, like I said, I think this is a totally different kettle of fish. Although I do expect us to probably field one of, if not our strongest 11.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense to. We played early on Tuesday. This is Saturday, and then, as I said, the majority of these guys that start tomorrow are very unlikely to be featuring on Wednesday night, or certainly not from the off. That's for sure. So that does work in our favour. I mean, just moving slightly away from the game itself, I was seeing something today on Twitter that I was sort of aware of, but I didn't realise how many players this is going to affect and how many big players it's going to affect. So I just wanted to bring this up. I'm sure you might have seen it already before, but I just thought it would be a good discussion point. Players out of contracts. We obviously know that Jorginho, that should come up in a sec. There we go. We know that Jorginho, Thiago Silva and Kante are out of contract. We know Silva is probably going to sign an extension. We know they're all out of contract at the end of the season. Interestingly for me is that it's the amount of players that are out of contract at the end of next season, in the next 18 months. That's quite concerning. And they're big players as well. It's Pulisic, it's Kovacic, it's Mason Mount, it's Aubameyang, it's Azpilicueta, and it's Ruben Loftus-Cheek as well. Were you aware of that? And how surprised are you about the number of sort of big players at Chelsea that are coming up to being out of contract? There's got to be some planning here, because we don't want to be in a situation where we're losing more top quality players on a free transfer.
Yeah, well, I was aware of the players specifically, although the one I didn't know was Pulisic. I didn't know he was out of contract. But the 3 that are expiring in 2023, obviously, we're planning already for the midfield future. And even Jorginho's got new contract talks. Thiago Silva may well stay. We don't know. Mason Mount's looking to get a new deal. Kovacic will almost certainly get a new deal. Azpi and Aubameyang, as sort of the elder statesmen of the squad, are probably more likely to move on. I would say the 2 wild cards in that one are probably Pulisic, who might be angling for a move away, but it depends how he performs under Potter. And I would also probably expect Loftus-Cheek to actually get a new contract as well. So I think only Pulisic really is kind of a 50-50 in terms of whether he'll stay or not. Now, I know, of course, it's not confirmed until they say they're staying and they've signed the contract and everything. But in terms of, prestige, how much they like the club, you got players like Mount and Loftus-Cheek who have been at Chelsea since they were young kids. They're not going anywhere. Kovacic is a cult hero. He's not going anywhere either. So I think there can be a certain level of certainty around some of the players, and about what their ultimate destinations are. We know one of Jorginho or Kante will leave for sure, for example. So I think that will still allow, in knowing that certainty, I think that will allow Bowley and co to plan for the future. What might upset the apple cart a little bit is obviously if one of those almost certainties, say, for example, just for sake of argument, Kovacic decides not to sign a new deal. Maybe he's not happy with the money, or maybe wants a new challenge. And then you've obviously got an issue because you're going to have a hole in the squad that you weren't planning for.
Yeah, I think that's the key point, and the planning has been something that in the past, under the previous regime, has not always been the best. We found ourselves often in situations where we could have quite easily signed players to new contracts. Instead, we've let them run down and we've lost them for free. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen to all these players. It obviously isn't. I agree with you. I would be very surprised if Aubameyang and Azpilicueta were offered new contracts at this stage in their career. I think come the end of next season, I think it'll be quite clear that there'll be surplus to requirements. I mean, even next season, if we're being perfectly honest, when Nkunku come in, maybe Rafa Leao might come as well. There's going to be added reinforcements at the top end of the pitch. I'd almost argue that next season, if the players come in that we expect to come in, Aubameyang is virtually going to be bit part player next season anyway. You could quite easily see that being the case. I think Azpilicueta, again, looking to sign right-sided back up to Reece James. Gvardiol might come in. I mean, Azpilicueta probably surplus to requirements at the end of this season. So you've got two players there that are probably just going to be bit part players next season. Christian Pulisic's the interesting one because he seems happier under Graham Potter for sure than he was under Thomas Tuchel. But again, he's probably not playing anywhere near as much as he would like to be, and as much as a player of his quality perhaps should be. I think he's one that would be seriously considering his future when signing a new deal. We obviously know that Mount's definitely going to stay. Kovacic is an interesting one though, because yes, whilst he'll most certainly be offered a new contract, it's whether he wants to sign a new contract or whether he wants to go and play somewhere else. He's been here a few years now. I'm not saying he's not happy and he wouldn't want to stay, but ultimately, it's quite tricky when a player makes up his mind and decides that actually I want to go and have a new challenge, and that would be a big blow to lose one of your starting players in the midfield. And as you say, it's an area that you might look at. Right, we're going to bring two midfield players in this summer, which is what the talk is. But then if you lose one if you lose one the following summer that you didn't really plan for, then it can cause a bit of a problem. But Loftus-Cheek's an interesting one because he's sort of come from nowhere. He's established himself, but then you think after this summer, because you presume that's two very good midfield players are going to come in. Yes, we're going to lose a couple we might sell. Where does Ruben then sit once the midfield signings have come in? I think that is going to have a bit of a bearing on whether he signs a new contract or not. He obviously would definitely want to stay, but how much of how viable is it that he's going to have a good place in the squad? I mean, how do you kind of see that shaking out for Ruben? Because obviously he's established himself as a really important member of the squad now. He's starting most weeks. He's been really impressive in the midfield, but were the likes of a Caicedo and Alvarez were to come in alongside a Bellingham or a Rice or whatever, where does that kind of leave Ruben for you? Because it's almost like, Jorginho, Kante, one of them leaves, he thinks, right, I've moved up, but then two come in and he's kind of either down a space in the pecking order or he's still exactly where he was.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think probably his loyalties to the club will remain, and he will ultimately probably end up staying regardless. But it is an interesting question. Maybe then you're planning for the squad and you're planning for extra eventualities. Do you sign and keep Loftus-Cheek on just in case Kovacic decides to go, for example? And I think especially in the case of in the space of Loftus-Cheek, you've got a player who is extremely driven, extremely athletic, very good technically on the ball, and is very dynamic and plays in lots of different positions. He has that sort of, I can't remember the word, but he's very sort of flexible in where he can play. And that really benefits Potter. So I'm sure Potter will want him to stick around, which obviously makes a big difference. If you're wanted by the manager, you're more likely to stay because, you're more likely to get games. So I would probably see it as Loftus-Cheek probably sticking around. I think he'll probably get a pay rise, especially if he continues on the good form that he's been on. I think he would probably earn it. So yeah, I think he'll stay personally.
Yeah, but yeah, I would agree on that. But it's man, we've already spent a load of money this summer, and then you look at it and you think we're not that far away again from having to sort of majorly revamp the squad again. When you look at it, I think of the six on the 9, on that photo, you could quite easily argue that in 18 months' time, 4 or 5 of them definitely aren't here, which is which is quite something. Given like we spent a lot of money, but there's still a lot of money to spend, and there's still a lot of overhauling of this squad to do. I mean, are you surprised at quite how much work the squad actually has needed to be done to it, and continues to need being done to it? Because we all kind of thought, that this squad was really good after the Champions League win. I think the Champions League win, as I said a couple of times before, kind of was in the long term was going to do more bad than good in terms of warping people's perceptions of how good this squad actually is. I mean, are you surprised at how much surgery this squad has required and continues to require in the future?
I am and I'm not, and I'll tell you why. I am surprised to a certain degree because it comes more into stark focus when you see things like this, where you say, "Oh, in the next 2 years, 9 players are going to need new contracts, right? Or all will have to leave." And at the same time, I'm not that surprised because that was kind of a lot of the way that the old regime tended to do things. Especially in terms of the older players, anyone over 30 just got a bumper 1-year deal. That's just how it went. Everyone just got a 1-year deal. I think Aspi even got a 1-year deal a couple of years ago. And so I'm not that surprised we're in this space with those with the older sort of style of players. I'm also, and so when occasionally you're going to have some years where at the same time as some of those players need the bumper contracts, some of the younger players will need one as well because they're going to be running down. So I'm not sure necessarily that 9 players over the next 2 seasons in terms of either contract, new contract or not, is actually that many given the size of the squad. I think more the caliber of the player makes it seem a bit of a bigger issue. If we're looking at somebody like the equivalent of like Malang Sarr, for example, on this list, we'd be going, well, it doesn't really matter either way. But when you're looking at someone like Mason Mount, Kovacic, Kante, Jorginho, Thiago Silva, these are big players who are starting, every game that they can, really. The reason I'm not worried is because now we're in a new regime. I think if we were under this issue, if we had this issue under the previous regime, I think it would be a little bit more difficult. And I think, especially in terms of Marina and co driving a hard bargain in terms of, what they want to offer players. I think it would probably be harder to retain those players, but I think the squad, the upstairs in the club now has a given direction, and they know what direction they kind of want to go in. So they'll have an idea about who they want to keep and who they don't, regardless. And the players and to a certain degree as well, there's kind of a clean slate. If people were difficult in contract negotiations or something like that before, well, they've got the opportunity now to actually, now it's a new regime, to look at things a little bit differently and have a different approach. And I think, Bowley and co, I think they prefer the sort of let's do business, nice guy approach rather than kind of the hard-nosed Abramovich Marina approach. So I would say that while it is certainly a concern, I'm not worried.
No, I agree. And just to round this section out, out of those 9 faces there, how many of those are you personally renewing? For me, I'm renewing. I'd definitely renew Thiago Silva, and I probably would renew Jorginho as well. And out of the other ones down the bottom there, I'd renew the first 4. I'm not renewing Aubameyang or Azpilicueta. Actually, to be fair, I'm probably not renewing Christian Pulisic either. So I'm probably, out of those ones, I'm renewing 5 out of 9. There's 4 I'm not renewing. How many of those would you be renewing?
I think it's a case of, there's kind of like 3 categories, isn't there? There's like, you definitely renew them, you definitely let them leave.
Yeah.
And it's kind of 50-50 based on their performances.
Yeah.
Thiago Silva, Mason Mount, and Kovacic are all 3, and Loftus-Cheek for me, I would all definitely keep. Kante, it would depend if he got fit or not. Jorginho and Pulisic would depend on the performances for me, and Aubameyang and Aspi I would probably expect to move on.
Yeah, I would totally agree on that front. I mean, moving on from that, then moving ahead to the weekend. What did you make of? Oh, I might as well bring it up on the screen now. We can discuss this in a bit more depth. I'll bring the lineup up, and I think we actually tomorrow. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's been officially confirmed anywhere, but I believe we'll be wearing the 3rd kit for the first time, because the home kit obviously clashes with Brighton, and as does the away kit, because the away kit is virtually the same as their home kit, and then our home kit's obviously all blue and they play in blue and white. So you would expect us to be repping the gold strip tomorrow, which would be nice to see. This is what we saw on Tuesday night against Salzburg. Obviously, the wing backs probably a little bit higher up, but the wing backs were wingers. What did you make of that? Because the only two times we've seen it under Potter is in the two Salzburg games. Obviously, in his first game in charge, he did have Reece James one side, so it was one conventional wing back playing. We saw no conventional wing backs. We saw two out and out wingers there in Sterling and Pulisic, three in midfield, which I felt worked quite well. And then obviously when these guys were pushing on as they were like that, you had the likes of Kovacic and Gallagher filling in to do the defensive work like so. I think it was probably game specific, but what did you make of it? Because it's not something we've seen very often at all.
I think you're right. I think it was game specific, especially considering the only times we've seen it have been against Salzburg. I think it's also partly due to personnel constraints, with who's injured and things like that. But I really liked it, although it was extremely attacking, and that's not a bad thing. Except that obviously, if you're playing wingers at wing back, you either need them to track back and do the defensive work, which A, they don't want to do, and B, they're not that good at, or you just tell them to bomb on and attack as much as you can and you leave the back open. And I think we did a little bit of a mix of both. And I think it's probably going to be down to Potter and his sort of tactical managerial style, and managing throughout the game to figure out what would be better if we are going to go for that approach again. I don't think we will against Brighton, but if we were to do that approach against Brighton, I think it would be up to Potter to make sure that the wing backs did their role.
I mean, I do like it, but my concern is that if you play this against, say, like a top 6, top 8 Premier League team,
you'll get killed.
Playing two wingers at wing back with no defensive capabilities at all, really, is a massive problem. You're asking for a lot from your two central midfield players or your two number 8s, whatever you're playing. So I think it can work in certain elements as we saw, but I think if this was rolled out on a regular basis, it would be problematic in games against much better opponents. But I mean, do you think we'll set up with this again tomorrow, or are you expecting a return to, say, a more conventional sort of 3-4-3, something a bit more like what we're used to seeing like that? I mean, what do you reckon? What would you like to see?
I would probably, in a way, I think I would probably possibly expect to see the 3-5-2 again, but with conventional wing backs over just wingers at wing back. I think that, seeing how we played against Salzburg, we were playing some real champagne football at times, and maybe to a certain degree that's not possible when you're playing regular, sort of more traditional wing backs in that kind of zone. As well as that, it kind of points out as well how much of a big miss Reece James is, because he can do both.
Massive.
He can play in that more traditional wing back role where you get forward a bit, and he'd be absolutely, killing it if he was in that advanced wing back role where most of the time actually the goal is to attack. Obviously the big point of Reece James is that he can kind of do everything. So it's a big miss to see him. So I don't know. I think it will probably come up to a tactical choice. Whether, especially Potter knowing what he does about his former players. I think, like I said, we'll probably expect to see something a little bit more conservative. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this formation with regular wing backs, and then I don't know, possibly seeing one of the or both midfielders bomb on instead.
Yeah, I mean, you could all. I mean, one thing we've certainly been under Potter is fluid. If we did set up like this at the start, there's no reason why that can't suddenly become, the 3-4-3. Why it's one of those eights can't push on to play there, and why the holding midfield player can't step in there. Yeah.
If you've got Jorginho and Kovacic as those two in the middle, and Mount's the other central midfielder, there's no reason he couldn't bomb onto the wing, or Gallagher, he could do the same job.
Yeah.
You play someone like Aubameyang or Havertz, who's a bit more fluid, or even Sterling or Pulisic. We've got a very fluid front line, which really benefits us, I think. So I think largely, it might, whatever it is at the start of the game, it might not even be that at the end of the game.
Exactly.
Especially with the way Potter likes to tinker during games, especially if we're not playing so well. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd be keen to stick with this. And by the way, guys, please keep smashing the likes on the stream and subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't done so already. We'd really appreciate it. Let me just get to a couple of things. Pulisic to Newcastle or Liverpool. I wouldn't be surprised if Pulisic. I could see Pulisic at Newcastle potentially. Wouldn't totally rule that out. I think they did actually try to get him on loan last summer. And agreed, Joe. This is the first third kit. I mean, for a while that I've actually thought this is actually very decent. It's a shame we're not going to wear it that much, but that's just the way it goes, unfortunately, with the third kits. Let's get into the lineup then, Oli. I think it's fairly unanimous decision or choice between the two of us that Kepa will continue between the sticks, and you would imagine that Edouard Mendy will play in that dead rubber against Zagreb on Wednesday night. I mean,
I would expect to see that. I think he needs a game, so he'll probably play in that, and it will also give him an opportunity to show Potter what he can do. So he'll be taking that game very seriously, even though for everyone else and for the purposes of the team progressing, it's a dead rubber. But for Mendy, that's a big opportunity for actually to show Potter for the first time what he can do. It'll be the same for a lot of the more fringe players in the squad.
Yeah, no, 100% for sure. I mean, I quite like the 4 when we played a 4 last time in the league. Did we play a 4 against United? Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
we went 4 and it was kind of like a diamond in the midfield. I did quite like that. I think we probably will stick with a 3 though. And if we're being honest, if we go with a 3 with Koulibaly still out with that knee problem, just on that, Potter saying obviously he felt it towards the end of the Brentford game and it was nothing serious, but obviously United game came too soon. There's nothing serious, but this is now a 3rd game he's missed. So you're sort of thinking, if he keeps missing games, the it's nothing serious line kind of loses a bit of credibility, and you start to think, well, hang on a second, what actually is the problem here?
A little bit, but you never know where a knock can suddenly just be just that little bit, whether it's still tight, and you're not quite 100% there to be in the squad. And Potter will have a good understanding with Koulibaly about, where he's actually at. So I think maybe, it's important to remember, it's been 3 games. It's also been like a week and a half. Yeah, it's not been very long because we played so many games.
It hasn't been. No, it hasn't. Yeah, when you put it like that, I mean, I completely forgot. It is not.
If you put it another way, if it's we're only playing league games, we're playing 1 a week. Yeah, you'd say 3 weeks or so. You'd be concerned, sure, for sure. But I think at this point still, it's probably just a bit too soon for him. Maybe maybe it's just instead of a little light knock or a light bruising or whatever, it's a tiny bit more serious than they initially thought. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he's out for this one. He might be on the bench for the next one. I think he was he in training? I don't think he was in training yet.
He was, no.
So I think that's also partly part of it. If he's 99% better but not back in training, of course he's not going to be even on the bench, is he? Because he's not. He won't be match fit.
I mean, just last thing on Koulibaly, presuming he's fit to play on Wednesday, you'd obviously use him against Arsenal. Would you use him? I personally would play him on Wednesday if he's fit, just to get a bit of match sharpness back in the legs again. I know he's only missed 3 games, but I wouldn't feel confident chucking him into the Arsenal game, having missed 4 games.
I would give him something like 60 minutes. I would give him like a good amount of time. Yeah, something like that, just to make sure he's got the true match fitness. He's up to the speed of the game. So I think it'd be smart to actually start him on Wednesday, because you wouldn't want to bring him on later on necessarily in the game when the pace has slowed down. So I think if he was going to play, he'll start Wednesday, and then maybe at the weekend afterward, he'd play a half or 60 minutes, maybe 70. And then if he was going to play, he'd probably come on again against Arsenal, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, with the personnel we've got available, obviously no Koulibaly and no Fofana for obvious reasons. The back 3, if we go with this system, which we are, it has to be that. There isn't really any other options. I mean, the only option you could potentially do is shift Chalobah to left centre back and play Azpilicueta at right centre back. But then
that's on balance. That's a weaker defence, isn't it? It's a weaker back line. So you probably want that generally. And Cucurella's got the ability to go forward and things like that. So which I think is quite important in Potter's system. And Chalobah's he's arguably first name on the team sheet at the moment. You can't leave him out.
No, you literally can't. I mean, what did you make of Cucurella Tuesday night? Because again, he started the last 4 or 5 games, but obviously in a few of those he's been subbed off early. He was subbed off at half time at Villa, subbed off at the hour mark against Brentford. Obviously subbed after 35 minutes against United. Tuesday night was a really important game for him. How did you feel he did?
I thought he had a much better game, and I think it's worth pointing out like a little bit of the context around his situation. Apparently, he had tonsillitis.
He lost 5 kilos, apparently,
Lost
didn't he?
4 to 5 kilos. Yeah, was in hospital, and so I'm more than anything, I'm a little bit frustrated that kind of in a way he was allowed to play at all. I know the personnel constraints were a bit difficult, and maybe he kind of felt like he had to, but I'm not sure necessarily it was the right choice to play him in some of those games because I think it might have slowed his recovery a little bit from that tonsillitis. I've had tonsillitis in the past, and it really knocks you flat. I can only imagine what it's like trying to play, an elite athlete level sport. It's going to be quite a difficult one. But I think on against Salzburg, he looked back to his best. So I would expect him, to have no issues, especially, I think a lot of the game tomorrow, it might be actually around seeing what Cucurella can do.
Yeah.
Because, he does know a lot of the players himself, his former teammates. He played with them for a season. He's going to know sort of the patterns of play a little bit. He's going to know who is dangerous in what areas and things like that. So he'll be an important member of the defence tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously prefer him at left wing back, but obviously needs must at the moment. We can't really play him there because we haven't got the options in the back three unless we go with a 4. But I mean, I think he's done well when filling in that position. I don't think we could ask too much more. Yes, some of the performances haven't been great, but he's still learning. He's new to the team, and he will only get better. But I do think he's far more comfortable playing in that left wing back slot than left centre back. But I think it's a position that he can learn more and that he can certainly grow into. And for me, he does start tomorrow. This is where it gets slightly interesting. What are you? I presume Azpilicueta here.
It kind of has to be, in my view, just because like I said, I think we'll see a bit more of a conservative game. Not to say Azpi's going to be rested in midweek to then play against Arsenal, but he may have to be regardless. Especially considering the constraints we have. There's an outside chance for having Loftus-Cheek there if we're going for a little bit more of an attacking setup. But like I said, I think if you're looking at, because Potter will know Brighton, he will know more how to neutralize Brighton rather than how to beat them outright, in my view. And so a player like Azpi is going to be far more conducive to neutralizing them than beating them outright.
Yeah, I'd agree. And in fairness to Azpi, he's not actually done that bad the last few weeks. It's not like last season where he was pretty poor every time he played. He's actually been okay each time he's played so far this season. So I don't really have any issues with him continuing there when the other option is to play either Sterling there, it just doesn't suit him at all. But having said that, going with this system, it does make choices when you get to the top end of the pitch a little bit more limited in what you can do. Let's move to the base of the midfield then. It's going to be Jorginho, isn't it? He's like he played. I thought he was obviously UEFA man of the match on Tuesday night, and I think I've spelled that wrong. But yeah,
no, that is right.
Is it not like that? That is right. I don't know why. It just looks a bit weird. Yeah. He was UEFA man of the match on Tuesday night after the Salzburg game. I feel for him, having 3 centre backs behind him and having 2 other midfield players around him, it looks much better. Yes, he still gets beaten in the transition on occasions, but it's nowhere near as much as when he's playing in a pivot with only one fellow midfielder alongside him. So I think it works better for Jorginho, and his better performances have come in Europe as well compared to the Premier League this season. But I think he's a durable player. He again's not going to play on Wednesday night, you wouldn't expect. So there's no worries about playing him again as far as I'm concerned. So it's kind of, it's the obvious choice and realistically the only option. Yes, you could play Ruben there, but that's something that Tuchel did, but it's not really something that Potter's looked to do at all. So yeah, I mean, almost by process of elimination and by default, it kind of has to be Jorginho.
Yeah, I think it plays to his strengths as well, like you say, having the 2 slightly ahead of him and the 3 at the back. Because when you think about what Jorginho can do, and what you think his strengths are obviously linking defence to midfield, to a certain degree midfield to attack, and mainly just passing the ball about. And if you look at where he is in that formation there, he's right in the center of at least 5, if not 7 players. So, you could argue that, especially when Chalobah and Cucurella get that slightly bit higher up like they tend to do, he's kind of the focal point of 7 odd players in midfield. And I think it caters to him really well because he's always got his head up looking around scanning for the best pass.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it is definitely better for him. And yeah, Jorginho slots in there. Before we get to the 2 central midfield players, 2 number 8s, I presume this is Chilwell. But the only problem I've got when we go with this system is that, for me, Christian Pulisic deserves to start. But the only place you can play him, if you're going with this system from the off, is in this left wing back position. So it's a bit tricky. I mean, would you go Chilwell or would you go Christian Pulisic? Because for me, Pulisic deserves to start, but we can't fit him in if we play this system anywhere else.
I would actually expect him to come on against Brighton.
Yeah.
I personally didn't think he had a brilliant game against Salzburg, and he did earn his start against Salzburg. It's worth saying that. And I think having maybe not, he played fine, but he didn't set the world alight like he was doing when he was coming on. In the more like short cameos that he was playing, maybe he was pacing himself a little bit more because he played the majority of the game against Salzburg. I wouldn't be surprised to see him come off the bench again and have a good cameo like he's been doing in the league.
Yeah,
and especially because he started on in midweek. I would expect to probably see Chilwell, and then maybe Pulisic plays in the Champions League game, and then Chilwell again against Arsenal.
Yeah, as much as I think Christian Pulisic does deserve a start, if we're picking this system, then for me, I'm probably going Chilwell. And I think Pulisic can have more of an impact from the bench, but at some point, he does deserve a run of starts. I think he should definitely start on Wednesday. But I could easily, to be fair, I could easily see him starting anyway tomorrow. So
yeah. And the thing is, like we say, that the system might change throughout the game regardless.
Yeah.
It might be that Chilwell's having a stinker and he gets hooked after half an hour, and then Pulisic comes on and it sets the world on fire. But I think simply just based on the personnel available and a mix of who's fittest, who's going to fit in the system, and and who needs to be there to win the game.
Yeah, I would agree on that. Let's move to the central midfield pairing then. Kovacic was outstanding in midweek. He was really good when he came in against United. However, he does need rest, because he should have got a rest against Brentford, but he came on after a quarter of an hour because Gallagher was feeling ill. He was probably expecting more rest against United, but came on after 35 minutes. He is nursing a knee injury. I don't know how serious it is, but obviously it's something to be wary of. Yes, he's not going to play on Wednesday, and he would essentially get a week off after this game. Is he too important to not start tomorrow, or do you think we can get by with using him from the bench?
At the moment, he's too important for me not to play, because every time he's not started, he's had to come on, and he's made the whole team look infinitely better.
Yeah.
And the game he did start against Salzburg, he scored an absolute cracker of a goal and had a fantastic game. I think there are a few players who I would definitely be resting on Wednesday. Jorginho's one of them. Kovacic is one of them. Probably Thiago Silva certainly be one of them.
Chalobah as well, probably.
Possibly, depending on who's available, he might have to play. But I would certainly expect a large portion of our midfield probably to have a rest. I think we'll be seeing a very much a weakened side against who are we playing again?
Zagreb.
Yeah. We're playing a weakened side against Zagreb. So I think the general idea will be strongest team this now, and then play the B team against Zagreb because we're already through, and then the strongest team possible against Arsenal. I think that's kind of has to be what you have to do to get the points.
Yeah, I would agree. This position here is now interesting because you've essentially got 3 players to pick from. You've got Loftus-Cheek, you've got Conor Gallagher, or you've got Mason Mount. You would probably, if we've got our kind of what we think Potter's going to do heads on, I think it's guaranteed to be Mason Mount. We probably might end up picking Mason Mount anyway, but do you think there's a valid shout to go with Ruben or Conor Gallagher? Because I think Gallagher deserves a start, but then again, it's fitting all these players in, and it's a bit of a headache. And I'm glad that it's not me making these decisions. But I mean, I thought Gallagher was outstanding in midweek, really good. Mount obviously rested with perhaps this game in mind, or just rest in general, and that was the game he decided to rest him on. But do you think it's an absolute guarantee that Mason Mount definitely comes back in?
I would expect so.
Yeah,
And he has been rested. He'll be fit as a fiddle. He'll be raring to go, hungry to go. And also because, in a sense, there's almost no point not playing him.
yeah,
Especially when the alternative is, you can give the minutes to someone like Gallagher in midweek next week, or even Loftus Cheek. You could have a Gallagher and Loftus Cheek start in the midfield next week. But I think someone like Mount might be too important in the actual Premier League game itself. Don't get me wrong, Gallagher's had a fantastic start ever since Potter's come in. Loftus Cheek looks absolutely phenomenal at the moment. But I think Mount probably edges both of them because I think in these kind of games, we need to play our strongest team. And I think that is Mount over either of them. I would say the one option, you could say is possibly Loftus Cheek at right wing back instead and Mount in midfield. And then,
yeah,
maybe Gallagher comes on. But ultimately, it'll be a tactical decision from Potter. I think maybe, you might see Ruben in the midfield. The only thing I would say about Ruben is, obviously he'll be able to go toe to toe in physicality with someone like Caicedo. Um, that is quite important.
yeah.
Kovacic isn't the strongest, Mount's not the strongest. Jorginho is a noodle in midfield.
But then I suppose for fluidity purposes, though, like if we were to do this and Jorginho moves in there, you ideally want someone that is comfortable playing sort of this area of the pitch here,
which is probably Mount or Gallagher,
which is Mount or Gallagher rather than Ruben. I'm not saying that Ruben couldn't do that, but you would say that Mount or Gallagher is far more suited to doing that than Ruben would be. That would be my only sort of reasoning for perhaps not starting Loftus Cheek. But then again,
the other option as well is, like you say, is with Azpilicueta on that right hand side. Like I say, it's going to be a more conservative sort of wing back setup. So you're going to need somebody to bomb on that side, to sort of make up the attacking three. And I would expect that to be Mount personally.
Yeah, I think I would probably go with Mount as well. I mean, as much as I would love to start Conor Gallagher,
I wouldn't be surprised to see both come on at some point. Whether depending on the system that we're playing at that point in the game, and we've got 5 subs this season, so there's a lot of opportunity for it.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to mix up. What's this here? I mean, I mean that would be great if a Benzema and a Aubameyang swap deal done. I mean, unfortunately, that's not happened. But we can dream. Or
thank you, Fabrizio Romantic. That is a beautiful
Modric
name.
And Cucurella swap deal confirmed. Yeah, I mean, Modric's an absolute baller. I love him, but unfortunately, I mean, Modric, to be fair to Chelsea, could have happened a number of years ago. Unfortunately, it never materialised. Yeah, never materialised, which is a real shame. Louis, big up. Thanks for tuning in, mate. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe already. Thanks for tuning in. Let us know your thoughts on the team so far. Right, now, Oli, obviously, when we go with the 2 up top, one's playing slightly off the centre forward, then it limits us because, again, you've got Raheem Sterling, you've got Aubameyang, you've got Broja, you've got Kai Havertz, you've got Christian Pulisic. There's a number of options there, but let's start with a player off here. I mean,
I think if you're playing off the striker, it has to be Havertz.
Yeah,
because that sort of second striker, sort of slightly loose, hovering in and around the final third. I essentially, when people ask me what position Havertz plays, I just call him a forward because he kind of goes everywhere.
Yeah.
He kind of does everything. So I would expect to see him just playing behind, well, not behind, but slightly behind and aside to the striker, and being kind of that more mobile striker as opposed to the main striker we'll get to in a second, being more the focal point. The one who's waiting in the box. Driving at defenders, things like that.
Yeah. After do Arsenal. Now, Arsenal won't be until next Friday or Saturday. The Arsenal preview, because we're playing them next weekend. Yeah, I'd agree on Havertz. I mean, other than the goal, which was obviously fantastic, what did you make of his overall performance on Tuesday? Because I didn't think he was better, but I didn't think he was that great outside of the goal. If I'm being perfectly honest.
I would actually, I would say the same. I was speaking to some other of my friends today, and they agreed as well. We thought that Havertz, outside of the goal, had an average game. He was fine. He did everything he was supposed to do and not a penny more and not a penny less, except, score won the goal.
Yeah.
So, he did fine. But considering how poor he's been of late, that was quite refreshing to see in a game where he just did fine. He wasn't terrible. He wasn't bang average. He just did well. And I think that consistency is what Havertz needs to build into his game, especially in the Premier League. So I think after a performance like that, especially when you score a goal, could have easily had an assist as well when he let Aubameyang in, who couldn't
Should have
square
done.
it away. So if you're looking at it from that kind of term, he had quite an important role. Obviously we only won the game because of his goal. So I would say it. He did fine, but definitely an upward trajectory on where he's been recently.
Yeah, and I think Havertz perhaps could be a bit of a confidence player. Mate, I know all players are confidence players, but do you know what I mean? Like the fact that he scored a goal, I think you'd be disappointed not to start the following week.
Well, a lot of the players are really young still when you think about it.
Yeah.
And so like confidence is going to be a big part because they don't necessarily have that experience or wisdom or permanence in terms of their
Yeah.
class. It's like someone like Jorginho or Thiago Silva has, or Azpilicueta has, for example, where they just think, no, I'm just going to play my game. It'll be fine. I think some of the younger players can kind of get in their own heads a little bit, and that's perfectly normal, for any young person in any profession. So, and we've got to remember Havertz is only 23, 22,
Yeah.
23, something like that. He's a young guy. A lot of the other players have risen to the occasion. You could say of Havertz that he necessarily hasn't in every moment. The biggest moment of all, of course, he did. But I think if you build that consistency and he doesn't get in his own way, I think he'll be fine.
Yeah, no, I think so. And look, I've been heavily critical of him on various channels and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I want all Chelsea players to do well. So it is it's in all our interests as fans for this guy to do well.
Yes, it will make us all happy.
Yeah, I will never actively want a player not to do well, but I will be fair and criticize when players aren't performing or not performing as well as they should be or as consistently well as they should be. And he falls into that bracket. So there's not a single player that I dislike on the Chelsea team. I will all want them to play well, but you've got to be critical when it's right to do so. That is correct, Louis. Make sure you guys do hit the subscribe button now. That would be much appreciated. Absolutely. Oli Aubameyang, after that purple patch of kind of when he got 3 goals in 3 games, it was pretty clinical. Those are pretty much the only chances he had in each of those said games, which is fine because he's there to put the ball in the net when presented with the opportunities. And I get the argument that if Aubameyang doesn't play well, you've got to offer him the service because he doesn't really offer much else, and we know that he's basically a penalty box striker these days, pretty much a poacher. What I didn't like against Man United was he was coming wide quite a lot, and that wasn't really working for me because you want him in the box because if he comes wide, who's in the box? Not really anyone. So I just wanted to kind of stay in and around the box and obviously try and make things happen, be there at the right time, read the game well. But at the same time, I thought I was really disappointed with him against Salzburg because presented with one very good opportunity and a couple of opportunities he should have scored, and that can be the difference between kind of going through and not going through or winning and losing a game. That's what he's been brought in to do, and I don't know. I know it sounds stupid if he's not scoring. If he's not scoring, he's offering nothing. But he's in the team to score and do those things. But I'm just. I don't know. I'm still a little bit unsure on him.
Yeah, I think you could say I would say the same. I think it was not very clinical of him against Salzburg, which is like you say, if he's not scoring goals, what's he in the team for? Because that's exclusively kind of what he offers. With more someone like Broja, you can argue that he offers a lot of pace and movement and strength and physicality, things like that. Sort of more intangible stuff. But Aubameyang is the goal scorer, and he scores goals. The only concern I do have is obviously Broja's not a natural goal scorer yet. He's not super clinical. He's still quite raw, quite green. Needs a lot of chances still to get a goal, and he's got one. He got one against Wolves. He did very well, and he's looked impressive whenever he's played. However, I think to a certain degree, you've got to be looking at playing on average, probably your more consistent players, especially if you're playing Havertz, who isn't a goal scorer either. You kind of need someone who, at least in theory, is a goal scorer by trade, and Aubameyang, like, who is actually a focal point for the attack, because otherwise, especially with someone like Azpilicueta on the right hand side, you're not going to get a huge amount of support from the wings. And this is the same reason, to a certain degree, why I said it might be a little bit more of a conservative sort of matchup, because I don't expect there to be a whole host of chances. And if we are going to have a chance of beating Brighton, I'm not saying that Broja wouldn't score a chance at all, but I'm saying that Aubameyang, even despite the chance he was presented with the other day, which he didn't score, I think probably, 99% of the time, he probably does score it. And going back to the other thing I was saying about, sort of the senior players kind of knowing what they can do and, things like that, he won't be affected by that. No. So I think I think it would be more likely, as much as I would prefer Broja to play, because I think he probably offers more in terms of his physicality and his pace against someone like Dunk, depending on who plays in midfield for Brighton, whether Dunk or Webster or both, or whether they play in a 3 or a 2, probably is going to be a back 4. So I think you would more expect to see Broja on merit, maybe, especially after the Salzburg game. But I think it would be more likely to see Aubameyang.
I mean,
it's a tough one.
Yeah, it is a tough one. I mean, personally, for me, I would pick Broja, but I can, from Potter's perspective, I can quite easily see why he would go to Aubameyang. But for me, I think Broja deserves an opportunity. I think I'd like to see how Broja.
I think he'd come on. I think he's more than likely to come on in the game.
He'll come on,
and I think he'll get 90 minutes in midweek as well.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's a dead rubber and not really what he would want, but any game's a good game when you're that young.
And it's still Champions League football at the end of the day, regardless of of the level of opposition. It's still a European game, and
exactly.
It's a chance to get some goals.
With the idea of then him playing 90 minutes in the middle of, in midweek, I would be more likely to say Aubameyang will start.
I mean,
in a way, it's a little bit political. I think Aubameyang a little bit kind of pulls rank over Broja, because he is a little bit older and he's accomplished more in the game. So I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not saying Aubameyang's doing anything like that. I'm just saying that's kind of the way in terms of the squad. Like, he's the more senior player. He's achieved more in the game. And, Broja, I don't think, while he's been very promising, I don't think he's proved that he should start over Aubameyang yet.
Perhaps not, but I do think at some point he does deserve opportunities. Obviously, midweek he'll get one, but I think he does deserve to start a Premier League game at some point. I mean, he did start against Brentford. I mean, I was there.
The other option is, you give Aubameyang like a lot of time off and you play Broja in both.
I mean, one person we haven't talked about, I was wanting to cover him briefly, Raheem Sterling, obviously not in the lineup for either of us in this game with this system. He has gone off the boil a little bit, if we're being perfectly honest. And I think to a certain extent to be expected. It's you can't perform well every game, of course,
unless you're Haaland.
It's a new team, it's a new system, it's new players. It's a different way of playing than it was at Manchester City. So even though he knows the league inside out, it's going to take him a little bit of time to adjust. But what I would say is that I mean, Graham Potter today saying he's not concerned about Sterling's form at all in the press conference and whatnot. And of course he would say that, but I wonder if privately he might think something a little bit different, because for me, Sterling obviously came in. We were excited by it. He started really well. And he still has 6 goals and assists to his name, but he pretty much carried the attack in the first kind of, I know it's still in the first part of the season, but in the first
number of games.
Yeah, in the first part of the first part, if that makes sense. He very much carried the attack. But if we're being perfectly honest, mate, the last month or so, really, I've been lucky to go to quite a lot of the games. He's been really not offering very much at all at the moment to this Chelsea team. And I think perhaps maybe it might be right for him to whatever you want to call it, rotated, rested, dropped, whatever word you want to use, for him to be on the bench for a game or two, just because, he's not delivering. And I think, I've said it before, and I'll say it again now. We weren't people that think we were going to get the same we were going to get the Manchester City Sterling at Chelsea have massively misread the situation, because that was never going to be it was never going to be the case, because one, we don't have the creative players that Man City have. we create chances, but at City, when you're winning most weeks and the team scores 3, 4, 5 goals,
you're probably going to get one. Yeah.
Well, there's that. And if you miss 2 or 3 opportunities because the team wins 3 or 4 and then anyway, no one remembers your missed chances. No one talks about that.
And the thing is, as well, is if you're generating 10 chances a game instead of, or 20 chances a game, if you miss one, you'll get another one. Whereas, in our team, it's a little bit less common. I think the thing with Sterling is he's obviously come in and done well at the start, and now he's kind of finding himself a little bit out of form. I think the situation for him is difficult, but I think he's a complete model professional, and he'll be totally okay. He, like I say, he's another one of those who knows what he can do, and I think it's worth saying as well, against Salzburg, I thought to a certain degree he was kind of like the fluid fulcrum of a lot of our sort of champagne football maneuvers that we were playing, that was sort of like 1 touch, 2 touch. The one specifically I'm remembering was on the left wing, that he kind of he was really important in it, with his off the ball runs and then little flicks and touches and things like that. So I think it's easy to say about Sterling that, well, he scored 3 earlier on in the season or whatever it was, and now he's not scored in a month, and what does he offer? But I think there's more to his game, and so I think I would arguably take the same road as Potter's, that class is permanent, and he'll be fine.
I think he'll be fine for sure. But I think his place in the lineup is it could be right to question it.
I think that's fair. And with having 5 subs as well now, there are so many opportunities for people to make their season. Like Gallagher's really taken his chance. If he hadn't taken his chances, we wouldn't be discussing about him even coming off the bench or starting in midweek next week. So, or to a certain degree, it makes Potter's job better but harder, because you've got more players who are all to a certain degree performing at a level, that you will need to bring on at some point, because we've got more players that are performing, because more players are getting more opportunities. So I think just Sterling's finding it, is not in the squad right this second, but I don't think you can really question his quality for a second. And so I think I think it'll work out for him, to be honest.
No, definitely not. I do think though he shouldn't. One thing
I think he shouldn't start, because I don't think he's earned it, which is fair enough.
And I think one thing we can't do is have players that are deemed as untouchables without earning it.
Exactly.
Just because you're Raheem Sterling and you've had an outstanding career and you've won 4 of the last 5 Premier Leagues, you scored over 100 goals in the league. Only 3 players have scored 100 goals under Pep, him, Maguire, Messi, and whatnot. Yeah, great, fantastic. But you've got to earn the right to start for Chelsea. There's no guarantees. You shouldn't just automatically assume that you're starting for Chelsea, or you've got the right.
It's also tactical as well, isn't it? It might be that against a more technical minded fullback, I think Sterling is perfect. Against someone who's a bit more physical, might be a little bit harder for him. Not that he can't really take on anybody, because look what he's done at Man City for years. But it might be just in the way the team's tactically set up, or on a 1-to-1 basis with the player who he'd be up against. Maybe Potter just doesn't think it would be that good a matchup for him. And so. But again, with the subs, it might be the case that Potter thinks, well, Sterling might be a good idea to bring on now.
And in fairness, he's used the bench really well. So there's no reasons why players can't come off the bench and make an impact. And I'm sure Sterling will find his feet again. But right now, he's going for a tricky patch, and perhaps he doesn't really deserve to start. Right. Let's round out then, mate, with a couple of score predictions. Let me quickly just do these things in the chat, and then we'll do the score predictions. Didn't realise how rapid Bro was. Yeah, I didn't realise how quick he was either. And he is still raw. He's a young player. He's not got an awful lot of Premier League experience, but hopefully that rawness can be developed. And he's learning from great players. Aubameyang has been a great player. He's obviously great to learn from and whatnot. So yeah, I think there's no reason why Bro can't develop into a top player, but it is going to take time. We've covered that. who's in better form, Arsenal or City? Probably City, I'd say, because Arsenal dropped points against Southampton and lost against PSV. So I'd probably say City.
I would say over the whole season so far, I would say Arsenal are in better form on average to what they usually play like, but City are still in the league.
Arsenal are outperforming what's expected of them, whereas City are just doing what everyone expects them to do. Yeah, no one
which is win the league every year.
Exactly. But Oli, score predictions tomorrow. Are Brighton going to get their first win? Are Chelsea going to lose for the first time under Potter, or are we going to make it 10 games unbeaten? What are you going for? How do you see this one going? I mean, you said it could be a bit more of a conservative game. Are you suggesting then you think this could be low scoring?
Yeah, very much so. I'm thinking, I always want to back the team, so I'll back us to win, but I think it'd be 1-0. I think it will be quite fine margins. Could easily be 1-0 the other way or 0-0.
Yeah, fair. Okay, I think I don't never like to predict us to lose. I'll only predict us to lose in games that I think the opposition are considerably better than us, which is not that often. Yeah, it's not that often, which is quite a nice thing to say. It isn't that often, but still, these are the sort of games that you can easily come unstuck in. Brentford away was another one, which is a game that you can easily come unstuck in. Brighton, despite their form, have got decent players. And the Amex it's not the easiest place to go.
And remember, the players are going to have a point to prove against their former manager. These little personal little vendettas and personal little stories always make more of a difference than people think. And so that is part of the reason why I'm saying it might be a little bit more of a both teams are going to cancel each other out, and it'll be a bit more of a low scoring. I still think we'll win 1-0, maybe 0-0, but I think it's more likely that it's a very low scoring affair.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Having said that, now it'd probably be like 6-3 or something, won't it?
Oh well, I mean, if it was 6-3, I'll be bang up for that. So I'll taking the trip to the Amex tomorrow. So I'll be quite happy to see 9 goals. So yeah, if that's the case, that would be spot on. But yeah, that seems like a good point to round out. Guys, thanks so much for getting involved in the chat. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for interacting. Appreciate it as always. Oli, thanks for your time, mate. Great to chat all things Chelsea. As always, it's a pleasure. Guys, make sure you follow Oli on Twitter. I've tagged it. I've linked it in the description below. So please do click on the link and head over to his Twitter page and give him a follow. Some great Chelsea content on there. Some great opinions in general on there. So please do that. From myself, I will be back tomorrow. There'll be a match day vlog from the Brighton Chelsea game. So make sure you stay tuned for that. I'll be dropping at some point after full time once I've edited it outside the stadium. And from there might well be a player ratings tomorrow as well, depending on what time I get home. So stay tuned for that. And on your way out, please do smash the likes, smash the subscribe button as well. On the road to 2K, not too far away now. So please do that. But yeah, guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for your time, Oli. And enjoy the game tomorrow, people. And I'll be back tomorrow evening at some point. So until then, take care, enjoy your weekend, and up the Chelsea.